Given the shape we're in so many areas across the board, the taxpayers would probably like to know, are you going to need more from us? And how much, and when are you going to ask?
Brian, I want to say this way. The lesson of this crisis here in this country, and I think it's true of the lesson of financial crises around the world, is that governments tend to underestimate the ultimate cost and damage. They tend to move too late to try to address the crisis, and that makes the crises worse, more expensive, and more damaging. Our judgment is that it'll be cheaper over the longer term. It'll cost the taxpayer less over the longer term, and we'll see less damage to American business if we're more forceful up front in trying to put enough force behind this to help it get it to work. The Congress has given us substantial resources. We're going to use those resources as quickly and effectively and carefully as possible. We're going to try to stretch them as long as they can go by being as creative as we can and trying to bring in private capital. But what's important is we're going to consult with the Congress carefully to try to make sure that the world understands that the resources necessary to solve this will be available over time. And again, just one more thing on this. If you look back at crises that were handled well and solved well, they weren't solved in a few weeks or a few months. Even in the first year of authorization by governments, they took time to resolve, and we need to be realistic and open. But the important thing is that, again, that we send a basic signal working with the Congress that we will do what's necessary to fix this.
Let me read you some quotes about our system. Rogoff up at Harvard, most of the big banks need to be put in some form of bankruptcy and recapitalized. And I think everybody understands that. This next one's from Stiglitz. The government should allow every distressed bank to go bankrupt, set up a fresh banking system under temporary state control, rather than cripple the country by propping up a corrupt edifice. Is our banking system broken, bankrupt, as Stiglitz puts it, a corrupt edifice?
No, I think, as I said earlier, parts of our system are very strong. Many banks were not part of the problem, and they're going to be part of the solution. We have this enormously diverse country with 8,000 financial institutions, very different circumstances. Very important we not tar them all with the same brush. Some of them were well managed, some of them were less well managed. Our approach is going to try to differentiate among them to try to make sure we're giving assistance to those that need it and using, again, that taxpayers' money as wisely as we can to help facilitate this adjustment process, make sure it happens at least risk to the overall economy as a whole.
How is it that where the banks are concerned, we really don't know how much was lost and where yet?
It's the core of the problem, but the uncertainty that's at the heart of that concern has many different sources. One is just a deep uncertainty, again, about how deep and long the recession will be. It's also related to what the ultimate losses may be on a set of assets in a crisis, again, that has no precedent, we haven't seen. But another source of the basic uncertainty out there is that these markets are not working because there's no financing available. And those three things together make it very hard to ultimately decide, and for the market to decide, what the ultimate losses are going to be and where they're going to end up across the system. But if we move to do an aggressive program of recovery, we move on the housing front to help address the housing crisis, and if we take aggressive action to help restore the flow of credit in the financial system by providing substantial financing to the markets that leverage private capital, then we'll help reduce that source of uncertainty, and that'll allow these markets to start to gradually begin functioning again.
Let's talk about a world you're very familiar with, and that's Wall Street. Should the system of compensation, i.e. Wall Street bonuses that have been everyone's favorite target and under fire so much of late, should that change?
Absolutely, and it's going to have to change. We're focused not just on trying to make sure that the conditions Congress passed are being met and enforced, but we've set out new conditions that would apply to new forms of assistance to the system. But as important as that, we need to try to transform the overall system of incentives around the financial system, because those incentives were part of what caused this crisis. And we need to make sure that rewards are more tailored to the risks they're being taken, and that boards of directors do a better job of putting limits and constraints on risk-taking as a complement to those broad reforms to compensation. And we're going to initiate a process to try to bring a new set of guidelines and framework to make sure we bring about those broad reforms. But you're absolutely right, this has to change.
All right, Mr. Secretary, we're going to ask you to stay here. This vacant seat next to me is going to be filled by CNBC NBC's Steve Leisman. After we come back from a short break, the questioning continues during our live interview with the man of the hour, the man of this day, certainly in terms of our news, Secretary of the Treasury Tim Geithner. We'll continue from Washington right after this.
TIAA-CREF clients look at the world a little differently. They're people for whom a day at the office is never just a day at the office.